All right. Thank you for joining us tonight for Slam Dunk, an event to celebrate March Madness with Jewish National Fund USA. Tonight's JNF-USA Positively Israel program is in partnership with Illini Hillel and is co-sponsored by Illini Chabad, the Jewish Federation of Champaign-Urbana, and Sinai Temple of Urbana-Champaign. I want to welcome everybody who's joining us on Zoom, on Facebook Live, and YouTube Live. My name is Maya Williams, and I'm a student in psychology and music at the University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana, and this year I'm also a Jewish National Fund USA Campus Fellow. Through Positively Israel, JNF-USA offers expert speakers, celebrities, and partners to present how Israel is making the world a better place. Thanks to programming like tonight's, students gain an appreciation for Israel's contributions to the world, thus fortifying them with positive facts about this small desert nation. In addition to Positively Israel speakers, Jewish National Fund USA offers incredible travel opportunities for college students. Looking for a life-changing experience this fall? If you're unsure whether your in-person classes will resume next semester, take a leap across the ocean for a meaningful, inspiring adventure you are sure to remember for a lifetime on our inaugural GAP semester program, Frontier Israel. Designed by the expert educators at Alexander Muss Institute for Israel Education, this program will provide a real-life, modern-day pioneering experience for incoming freshmen and rising sophomores. To learn more, visit jnf.org/frontier. I also invite you to join me in Israel this summer on JNF-USA's Alternative Break. Alternative Break is a great way for young adults ages 18 to 24 to get their hands dirty with meaningful community projects in Israel. Learn more today at jnf.org/break. I also want to plug JNF-USA's Caravan for Democracy Student Leadership Mission, a 10-day, fully subsidized educational program for student leaders beyond the Jewish faith. This unique mission provides students with the opportunity to explore Israel through meetings with political, cultural, and community leaders from diverse backgrounds and faiths. Learn more at jnf.org/caravan. If you're affiliated with the University of Illinois, home of the first Hillel in the world, I would like to invite you to join Hillel's Passover celebration starting next week. From kosher Passover meals to an afikoman scavenger hunt, Hillel offers programming for everyone. Visit IlliniHillel.org/Passover to sign up. Anyways, in case you have not already heard, the Illinois basketball team very recently won the Big Ten championship. Sorry, Ohio. Earning a #1 seed in the NCAA tournament. As we cheer on the current men's basketball team, we look back at a previous player who has made a real impact. Tonight, our featured speakers are Dion Thomas, American-Israeli former basketball player, and Scott Gendell, Jewish National Fund USA's Vice President of College Engagement. Deon Thomas serves as an analyst for the Big Ten Network and Fighting Illini Sports Network. He finished his college career at University of Illinois as the school's all-time leader in points. Thomas was the first pick of the second round of the 1994 NBA draft by the Dallas Mavericks before opting to start a highly successful 14-year international pro career in 6 different countries. He helped Maccabi Tel Aviv win the Israel Championship, the Israeli Cup, and the Euro League Championship twice as one of the most successful American pros of all time in the European leagues. Scott Gendell is the president of Wilmette, Illinois-based Terrico Incorporated, a shopping center development and management firm he founded in 1985. A supporter of reservoir development in Israel through JNF-USA, he led a mission to Israel in 2003 with the late Illinois Senator Paul Simon. Scott serves on the board of the Illinois Holocaust Museum, as well as the advisory board of the Jewish Studies Department of his alma mater, the University of Illinois, of course. There will be time for Q&A, so if you have questions for our speakers, I ask that you please type them in the chat. Without further ado, Dion Thomas and Scott Gendell.
Thank you, Maya. What a unique treat for me to be with my dear friend, Dion Thomas. So Dion, what was it like being in the Big Ten bubble in Indianapolis? And what will you tell us about what it's going to be like over the next 3 weeks?
Well, I'll tell you this. First of all, I want to thank the JNF for having me on and allowing me to be able to come on and tell my story. And of course, doing it with you alongside one of my very best friends is always a pleasure. And to thank everyone that's out there joining us here on Zoom, Facebook Live, as well as YouTube Live. Really appreciate you guys' interest in coming out and hearing my story and how my journey has been affected by Judaism and my travels around the world. But to answer the question of how it feels to be in the bubble, I will say this. I was not as locked down as the basketball teams are. They can't leave their rooms. I mean, the food is delivered to their rooms, the whole nine. So I wasn't allowed to really mingle as much in public, but I definitely didn't have the same restrictions that the athletes do. But at the same time, being a member of the media, I'm not allowed to speak with the athletes, really get close to the athletes. So that's one of those things that I guess was kind of strange. But hey, I'm home, I'm here, and my Illini are kicking tail, so I can't complain too much.
Give us a prediction. How far will the Illini go this year?
You know, that's always a difficult thing because in the NCAAs, and I've, of course, have played them in the past. It's always one game and go home. So you have to be fully prepared and mentally, physically ready at all times. But I see my University of Illinois fighting our University of Illinois fighting Illini, making it to the championship game. And that game, I believe, will be played against Gonzaga. And I would love to say, and I feel it deep in my heart, that we will be bringing home our first national championship.
Oh, I love hearing that, Dion. So you grew up on Chicago's West Side. We hear so many things about the West Side. Describe your upbringing for us.
Well, first of all, let me say my family was very close. Both grandparents, we lived within walking distance of one another. Everyone except outside of a couple of my aunts lived on the South Side, but everyone else lived on the South Side. So cousins, aunts, my grandparents, my mom, of course, me and my brothers, we all lived within walking distance. And that was the joy of living on the West Side. Now, the underbelly and the other side of that is the reality. We grew up in a very poor area. We grew up in the projects. I grew up on 15th and Loomis, which is right around, if anyone from Chicago knows University Village, that's right where UIC's campus is. It's not as nice. Now it's a lot nicer than what it was. And I spent a lot of my time, and my kids make fun of me about this, sitting on the floor. And we sat on the floor, especially at night, because you had you ran the chance of bullets coming through your windows or things of that nature. So you sat on the floor, so you stayed below window level. So it was not an area where, anyone would really want to grow up. But it wasn't all bad either, especially if you just knew how to, see things before they happened. I mean, you almost had to be clairvoyant to really make sure you were paying attention to your areas. But as a child, my mother was great. Single household, of course. Unfortunately, my dad left when I was 2 years old. So it was really just the women in my life that raised me, my mother and my two grandmothers. And it could have been tougher if it was not for family. Family is what kept us together. And then as we grew up, you really had to be careful of the gangs that were in the neighborhood, the drug dealers that were in the neighborhood. And unfortunately, a lot of that was my family. So it was really not the most pleasant place, but not the most horrible place at the same time, because you learn how to adapt.
Did you think about race relations growing up, and were you interacting with people who didn't necessarily look like you?
Scott, I grew up on the west side of Chicago, man. No, but on the serious side, though, the only, let's say, people of another race, if you live where I lived, under the railroad tracks, you have Pilsen, which is a predominantly Mexican-American neighborhood. So we weren't really allowed to go to Pilsen because there was always brushback, blowback because of the various gangs that were in the area at the time. So any interactions over it in the Pilsen area was never positive. But you come back to the area where I grew up, and the only interactions that we had with Caucasians or with white people were the police. I mean, there were no white teachers in my school at the time. All of the students were Black. You know, I joke with people and say, you don't, you know, I can't use the word predominantly Black area because it was a Black area. There was no predominantly in it, with the exception of the police. And far too often, unfortunately, those interactions were not good.
So your high school coach at Simeon High School was Bob Hambrick. He was a hard ass, tough love guy. How did he impact your development?
Well, you know, yes, Coach Hambrick was tough. He was a man of conviction. He was a man that believed in rules and believed in structure. And when you grow up in my area, rules and structure and conviction and character, to be honest, are just not they're not there and they're not there as much as you would like them to be. There's not as very many people that are running around and believing in those things. Now, you have the rules of the street. I mean, so you have to understand, you know, where to go, what to do, what not to do, what colors to wear here, what colors not to wear there, how to wear your hat, how not to wear your hat, you know, so you learn all of those things as you're growing up. So when I got to high school and I got to Simeon and I started playing basketball, you know, you know those things, but now you have to really learn how to conduct yourself in a very different setting. You know, when I walked into Simeon, I was a 6'3" freshman. So I was very gangly, very odd looking, very thin, you know, and and I don't care what nobody says, you have bullies everywhere. So when I joined the basketball team my freshman year, that was the first time I had started to play basketball. So there was really, you know, I didn't know any of the guys that were on the team. I didn't know, you know, they all knew one another from playing in grammar school and elementary school. But then Bob Hambrick comes in. And it's one of the best things I honestly have to say that happened to me. You know, now my mother was a big disciplinarian, but Bob Hambrick was not just a disciplinarian. His rules and the way he ran things taught us how to be men. It taught us responsibility on a different level than the responsibility that I was getting at home with my mother with chores and so forth and so on. This was a little bit different. And if you stepped out of line, you know, if you didn't do, you know, Bob Hambrick's rule was in school, we sat in the front of every class. We had to ask questions. Homework had to be done. We couldn't be late. You had to be on time. And if you didn't, he had a paddle. And I'm like a real paddle that had holes in it. It was wooden. And so when you got to practice, if you didn't have all of those things in order that you were supposed to, you knew you were getting the paddle. So you asked how it shaped me. It made me learn that there are rules and that I had to follow them really quickly. But at the same time, you know, he gave fatherly love and fatherly advice. So it wasn't like he was just beating the crap out of us. There was a lot of hugging and life lessons and explanations that came along with the occasional paddling.
So you were preceded at Simeon by Nick Anderson, who was future Illini great pro with Orlando, and also Benji Wilson, who was tragically murdered. He was Player of the Year nationally. How did their experiences shape you for your time at Simeon?
Well, let's start with Ben. Of course, I was in eighth grade when Ben was killed in 1984. But that previous year, I watched Ben play basketball when Simeon went to the state playoffs, and they played against Tim Hardaway, who was another great player out at Carver. And when my brother decided that I was going to play basketball, he chose Simeon because of Ben Wilson. Now, of course, my mother didn't know much about sports, so she wouldn't have known for me to go to Simeon or Robeson or Inglewood, which were the three schools that were within my district. So my brother chose Simeon because, one, he played against Ben Wilson and Simeon when he played basketball at Robeson. So he knew how good he was. When we watched him on television, he would point out Benji saying, hey, this is the guy you need to try to be like once you get to Simeon. So before I even knew him, he was kind of an icon. And, you know, he was an icon in the city. He was the #1 basketball player in the country. You know, when he died, Magic Johnson, Michael Jordan, and others were at this kid's funeral. And here he was, a 17-year-old kid. But that's just how that's how much game he had. And let's just be honest with it. So my brother says, hey, this is where you're going to go, because if Bob Hambrick can make a Ben Wilson, he can make a Deon Thomas. So it had already given me something to shoot for once I got there. Now, Nick Anderson was a senior my freshman year, highly recruited, highly touted by basically every school in the country. Nick was, and in my opinion, I know I'm the all-time leading scorer at the University of Illinois, but I have no problem saying that I think Nick Anderson, as far as I know, is the best basketball player to ever play at the University of Illinois. So again, setting high standards and finding people to follow and to mimic and how they do things and how they play the game was a huge part of what we did at Simeon. And I say that because Bob Hambrick had a way of doing things, and we call it the Simeon way. Coach Hambrick would take, I'm sorry, Scott, Coach Hambrick would take a freshman or an incoming freshman and pair him with an upperclassman. And so that upperclassman has to mentor the freshmen, teach them the game, how to play, whether it's footwork or whatever it is. You know, and Irvin Small was my freshman, was my upperclassman, but he was best friends with Nick Anderson. So I got to hang around these guys, watch these guys, and really imitate what they were doing, which ultimately, I believe, led to my success in high school.
So then you go on to the University of Illinois, another tough love coach in Lou Henson. You were there at the same time as Stephen Bartow and Kendall Gill. How did that affect your development, not only as a basketball player, but as a man?
Well, you know, and that's the joy of having upperclassmen. And as you mentioned, Steve Bartow was there, Kendall Gill was there, Nick Anderson was still around, because I went to school the summer before my freshman year started. So I still had Irvin Small there, Marcus Liberty, a lot of guys that were from the state of Illinois that I had looked up to when I was in high school, that I had watched that 89 Flying Illini team. And I was really excited about being able to go there and play with those guys. So being able to hang out with them, you know, you get to see what it's like to be on a university campus, especially because it was a culture shock for me. Again, coming from my neighborhood where there were no white people to stepping on the campus of the University of Illinois, where it's 70 to 80% white, was a culture shock. So hanging with those guys, I learned what to do, what not to do, and really a lot of how to just really prepare your time for school and be more, you know, structured than I was when I was coming out of high school. So, you know, being able to have those guys, those older players there to show me the ropes was great.
So you're drafted by the Mavericks, 28th in the draft. And like another great Illini of a generation or two before you, Tal Brody, a mutual friend of ours, you choose to play in Europe and then ultimately Israel. What went into your thought process, and describe that journey for us?
Well, but before I can talk about that, I have to take kind of a step back. When I was in high school, my senior year, we had the pleasure of going to play for 10 days in Amsterdam. So again, you're taking a bunch of kids that are from you know, various areas of the city that had never really left the state of Illinois, and you take us to Amsterdam. So I was blown away, just one, at how nice the people were, two, at how beautiful the country was, and just the differences, I guess, between the United States and Europe. So fast forward to draft night. I get drafted, as you mentioned, by the Mavericks, go to vet camp, go to rookie camp. I played great. And in the 11th hour, as I'm sitting there about to sign my contract to join the Mavericks, my agent calls me. Mark Bartelstein is my agent, and which I'm sure you probably know Mark from Priority Sports. And Mark says, well, I made sure I had to give you this option before you sign your contract, and that was to go and play in Spain. So I didn't sign my contract that night. I called Jimmy Collins, who was the assistant coach at Illinois, who I had formed a great relationship over the time that I was there, more like a father figure to me than just my coach. And we sat down and we talked about it. We talked about the pros and cons, of course. I always wanted to travel. I always wanted to see more than just the United States or what I was saying. My grandmother used to always tell me, baby, you're bigger than the village. The village is the area that I was raised. That was kind of the nickname for it. They called it the village.
Little village.
Yeah. And she used to always tell me, baby, you're bigger than the village. You're bigger than the village. So when that opportunity came, and I'm talking to Coach Collins, and he says, well, at the end of the day, the important part is not whether you play in Europe or if you play in the NBA. He was like, you can go this year, go a year, and then come back, because the NBA is not going anywhere. And he was like, and at the end of your career, and he used to call me Big Junior. He was like, at the end of your career, Big Junior, it's all about doing what you want to do and not doing what you have to do. So I was like, oh, okay, that's all I need. So I signed the contract to go to Spain instead of going to the Dallas Mavericks, with all the intention of coming back the following year in 95. So in 1995, if you recall, the NBA went on strike. So when they went on strike, of course, another team from Spain put a very good offer on the table. And instead of waiting to the end of the strike, I decided to go back to Spain. And that was pretty much it after that, man. I mean, I really didn't have much interest in coming back after that.
By the way, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that Jimmy Collins was a huge influence in your life. He passed away this year, and we all miss him, and may his memory be a blessing.
Well, I appreciate that, Scott. You don't realize how quickly 3 months go by. It's been 3 months since his passing. And yes, he was like my dad. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Did you notice a difference in how you were treated in Europe versus America, and your interaction with people who didn't necessarily look like you?
Oh, no doubt. No doubt. I mean, as the number one basketball player in the state of Illinois, my high school season, I was Mr. Basketball as well. I was the number 3 player in the nation. And like I know, I was constantly in the Chicago Sun-Times, the Chicago Tribune. I was again, they mentioned earlier, my resume, I was the best player at the University of Illinois. I was leave there as its all-time leading scorer and the likes. But while I was there, and in high school as well, the number of episodes I had with the police, and this is not me as I'm doing something. Once I was sitting on my porch in my neighborhood at my house, and I was made to get off of my porch and lay on the hot summer ground because they were looking for somebody that fit my description. Now, granted, at this time, I was about 6'5". The person they were looking for was 5'9". I don't think that description, I don't think that's fits the description of me at all. But I never faced anything like that in Europe. Now, people will say, well, that's because you played basketball. No, not every. There's some tall people in there that don't play basketball. But even if that's the case, I played basketball here as well. I was a 28th draft pick here as well. And I still had to face some of those same things. So yes, there was a big difference. I just didn't have to deal with that when I was there. There felt less pressure there. There was less, you have to watch what you do, where you go, and how you interact with people. I mean, the police, and I keep bringing up the police, and I hate to do that because I don't want to demonize police officers, because my dad was a police officer, my brother was a police officer. So I don't want to demonize police officers. But when I didn't have to worry about when I was driving down the street and I saw a police car behind me if I was going to get pulled over or not. And here I am, I'm 50 years old, Scott, and I still getting the hairs on my arms stand up when that happens.
So you've been married to a beautiful Israeli woman for over 20 years now, Daphne, and she's just lovely. How did you meet, and what was that like?
Yeah, 22 years, man. 22 years goes by in a blink of an eye. And I can honestly say, it doesn't feel like it's 22 years. And I married up, bro. She's a great person. She's a great mom, great wife, and has been my teammate for 22 years. And no knock on Rennie Clemens or Larry Smith or Anthony Parker, but this is the best teammate I've ever had. So, and they'll be the only one I ever had. But you asked how we meet. It was actually really fortuitous because we were playing in a city called Gijon, which is in the northwest corner of Spain. This isn't a huge tourist place. I mean, unless you want to go see art and architecture and things of that nature, it's not a real big tourist place. So we were there. I finished playing my game that night. A teammate and I are leaving the game. We're going to an ATM machine to get money so we can go out, have dinner, and just really just relax and unwind after the game. And I see this beautiful young lady walking down the street who reminded me of my favorite singer, which is Sade Adu. You know, for Sade, for those that don't know. So Daphne, she's coming down the street, hair pulled back in this beautiful ponytail. And I'm like, my gosh, she looks like Sade. And so there was no way in the world I was going to let her get by, just in case it was Sade. So, but I stepped in front of her and I was like, you know, I'm like, hola. And she looked at me and she was like, well, I don't speak Spanish. And I was like, good, because I don't either. You know, this was my second year in Spain. The only Spanish I knew was what I remembered from Sesame Street when I was a kid. And that would not have helped me in any situation whatsoever. So we began to talk and I asked her and her friend if they would join us. So we went out to dinner. We ended up going to a bar afterwards, or like I wouldn't call it a bar because I don't make it sound like it was a club, but it was an area where you could sit and just really talk and enjoy each other's company. It's music playing. So we actually ended up sitting out there for, to be honest, I don't know how long it was. It was just time to go. And I was like, man, we have to fly out. So we ended up having to leave and fly back to Girona, and her friends stayed there on vacation. And so we developed a long distance relationship after that, where we really just talked on the phone for like the next few months before we were able to see one another again.
Did the fact that she was Israeli influence your decision to play for Maccabi Tel Aviv?
Actually, no. We were comfortable in Spain. I was playing really well. I was one of the top players in the Spanish league, the ACB. I was doing extremely well financially, and she liked it there. I mean, she really enjoyed Spain. And, you know, when she wanted to go home, she would go over. It was only a 4-hour flight. You know, her mom and sister and brothers would come over and visit us there. So it was really it had no influence whatsoever. Actually, the funny thing was I got a phone call from David Blatt, who was the assistant coach at Maccabi, who went to Princeton, and you know, he's from the East Coast, played for one of the best coaches ever in the history of college sports with Pete Carell. And I get this call at 5 o'clock in the morning, and he calls me and he's like, may I speak to Dion? And I'm like, first of all, who is this calling me at 5 o'clock in the morning? You know, you're in Spain, you don't go to bed till 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. So you call him at 5, and I'm like, this is Dion. And he's like, I got a question. Well, first of all, he's like, this is David Blatt. And I'm like, who? And he says, well, I'm the coach at Maccabi Tel Aviv, and I had a question for you. And so I'm like, what's going on, coach? He says, well, do you want to win championships or continue to just make a boatload of money in Spain? I say, well, I want both. So if I can have both, I'm in. You know, so that's kind of how the conversation started with Maccabi, and I love my time there and go back every year as much as we can now.
So your daughters were born in Israel, both of them?
No, my oldest daughter, Gabrielle, was born in Spain. And my youngest daughter was born in Israel, in Tel Aviv.
And how did your new in-laws welcome you, or was it a process?
Well, let's just say this. Well, both girls, to finish off that first part, both girls were bat mitzvah in Israel. But how we got married, let's get back to that one first. And then that'll tell you how the process went. Okay. Because I played in Israel before playing for Maccabi Tel Aviv. I went to Israel for about 6 months after an injury. So Daphne and I, we get back together because after that time, that short time where we were dating long distance, she had an opportunity to go to, well, it was either get serious or she had an opportunity to, move on and go live in Miami and Florida. So I was 24 years old. And I knew when I saw her, and this is God's honest truth, that that's who I wanted to be with. But at the same time, I knew at 24 years old, I would have messed that up. And that's just the truth of the matter. So when she proposed okay, well, we need to get serious or I got to move on thing, that's what happened. I'm like, well, I can't give you what you're looking for right now because I'm not ready for it. So she left. She went to Florida where she lived for 2 years. We spoke once in that 2 years, and that was at the very beginning. So we went a while without speaking. So I called her one day out of the clear blue sky, and I asked her, I'm like, well, are you seeing anyone serious right now? And she was like, no, I was waiting for you. So she came back and this time I was in Sevilla, Spain, and that summer we got married. So that's how quick that happened. So I say that to say this: her parents weren't ready to have a son-in-law, and they didn't find out they had a son-in-law till we were already married. And then that summer I was injured. I had injured my back. So by the time basketball season rolled around, lo and behold, I'm going to play for Maccabi Rishon in Rishon LeZion, Israel. So she calls her parents and her family and says, well, you need to go and pick up my husband. And they're like, what? What are you talking about, husband? We thought you were just dating. What do you mean, husband? And that was that was the first time I met my in-laws in person. And I will tell you, my grandmother used an expression about being as nervous as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs. When I got on that plane and then I got off that plane in Israel, I know we're on Zoom and Facebook Live, but I got to say it, I was scared shitless. I didn't, because you hear things, guys. You don't know how people are going to react. You don't know, again, where I come from, in my background, you hear that. I don't know how they're going to react to Daphne being married to a Black man. I had no clue. Couldn't have been more loving, more open. You would have thought they had known me my entire life, is how her parents, her brother and sister, her siblings, her cousins, and everyone treated me. And immediately I had one of those sighs where you could just breathe, and the feeling of just, love was crazy. Just amazing people. And I love them to death.
So we hear all the negativity about Israel and the A word, the apartheid narrative in the intersectionality community. Tell us what we don't know about life in Israel.
Well, I'm going to start that off with a story, right? So we went to the Dead Sea one day. And as we're driving back from the Dead Sea, that was an area I hadn't been to or hadn't seen. And I'm looking at all these beautiful, like skyscrapers and like condominium buildings. And in this other area, there was all these beautiful, that if these houses were in LA or Glenview or Naperville, they would be $2-3 million houses. Easy. And I'm like, where is this? I'm like, why we don't come here? She was like, oh, because that's the West Bank. I said, what? I said, that's the West Bank? She was like, yes, that's the West Bank. And I'm like, okay. I was like, this is, and I already knew what you would see on television wasn't always true. But when it smacks you in the face as clear as day like that, I was like, hold on, this isn't what they show you on the TV and the news. and the news back home. I was like, this is crazy. But you asked
And,
me,
and these were Arab neighborhoods.
oh yes. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, Scott, how many Jews you know live in the West Bank? I don't know any that live in the West Bank, but I'll say this. Those the relationships are nothing like you see on TV. I mean, I wouldn't call it an apartheid country. I know several Arabs and Palestinians that lived in Haifa and Tel Aviv that were friends of mine that lived and worked in Tel Aviv and in Haifa. I mean, my buddy in Haifa, his grandfather opened that store and meat market that they had. So it's been in their family like 3-4 generations, and they live there just like anyone else. So, I try to tell people, don't always believe what you see on television or the crap you read on the internet until you witness it for yourself. Because my wife and I at that time had been married 15 years, maybe 15 years. And I had traveled all over Israel, and I'd met all kinds of people from all kinds of places and, all over there. And that was the first time I'd really seen that and really had it affect me to really, really open my eyes and be like, okay, this is totally not what we're seeing at home. And that's even with meeting all of the people that I met. So I know, I'm just rambling now, but it's nothing like what you see on television.
So you have these two brilliant, beautiful daughters. They're two Jewish girls, both bat mitzvah. They are both of mixed race, both lived in Israel and in America. Their narrative and their story is fascinating. Mm-hmm. How would you describe their experience and who they are today?
Oh my gosh, they are, and you said it. I am so super proud of the young women that they are becoming. They're both brilliant students. They are both great people with compassion, huge hearts, and willing to help and assist wherever they can. But at the same time, here I had to have the discussion with them. And I would have the discussion with them because when they walk out of our front door, you mentioned that they're of mixed race and that they are, part Jewish. But when they walk out the door here, they're Black, and that's the way they're going to be treated, and that's the way they are. So we've had those conversations with them about how they could possibly be treated here in the United States. Never had to have that conversation with them when we go to Israel. As a matter of fact, I have to kind of beat the boys off with a stick when when we get over there, because they're not treated or looked at in any negative light. I mean, they have been amazingly, they're just so well-rounded of people. And I think part of that becomes because they have embraced their Israeli and Jewish heritage, as well as their Blackness. They fully understand who they are, because we constantly talk to them about it from the time they were born. Daphne and I had decided that they were going to speak Hebrew or learn Hebrew. So she's been speaking with them in Hebrew since they hit this earth. Now, my Hebrew is god awful, so I don't even try.
It's not worse than Tal Brody's.
Oh, for sure it's worse than Tal's. For sure. No doubt in my mind it's worse than Tal's. But, but they're two rock stars, man. And they're two rock stars. And I have to take my hat off and give a lot of that 99.9% of that credit to their mom, because, she's a rock star.
She is. And before we open it up to questions, there's so much conversation about Black-Jewish relations in America. There was a long-time alliance between Blacks and Jews. How do we talk to both communities in a way that says it's not a zero-sum game? You can lift up another community without bringing down your community. And that's an important message. How would you message that to both communities?
Well, I think that's That's something that we have to get beyond here in the United States, period. I mean, it's a huge conversation here that when you help someone else, that you're not taking away anything from you or from your people. A big part of that comes from, being able to have tough conversations, being able to talk about history, being able to talk about how relationships are formed. And that's where it comes from. A lot of people today, if you watch the news and things of those sorts, they tell you that there's no connection to our neighborhoods. Our communities and our neighborhoods have been connected since we all got here. Because for example, where I live over in the village, it's right next to Jewtown. They ain't call it Jewtown because it was a derogative. It's not in a derogative term, but that's where the Jews lived and congregated. And then the blacks moved there, and we lived there together for many years now. Before people started to do better and move to different areas of the city. But at that time, our relationships have been strong the whole time, even through the civil rights movement and so forth and so on. Those things have to be talked about. Those things those connections have to be reiterated over and over and over again to get people to understand that we're in this together. We always have been. We have shared histories. We have shared backgrounds. And until those conversations are had, then this is what people are going to continue to fall back on, unfortunately.
We have a question from Elizabeth Vandermark. Was there anything that you struggled to adapt to when moving overseas? Or was there anything a culture shock from moving from the States?
Well, I like those questions, and thank you very much. I appreciate them. I guess the adjustment was within me. As I mentioned before, when here in the United States, I worry constantly, and even today, when the police pull up behind me or they're driving, I get like extra. I won't say nervous, but I put both hands are on the steering wheel and making sure I'm going to the speed limit. Didn't have to do those things when I was in Europe, and I think that's something that I had to take a back seat and really relax and understand that okay, what happens there doesn't necessarily happen here, and how you deal with people, how people look at you, and how you feel about yourself when you're around these people. And these are some inner arguments that you had to work with and work out through yourself. So that was really one of the differences. Now, of course, when I went over by the first time, I was by myself. So it was really the language barriers that you had to overcome. And again, I was in Spain for the first few years, and at that time, no one in Spain spoke English. Or very few. I had translators on the first two teams that I played for. So then I took it up on myself to make sure that I learned the language. And once I learned the language, it opened a lot more doors, and I built a lot more relationships. So the cultural things, no, not so really, other than the language and really taking a step back from my inner self and understanding that everything is not the same as it is in the United States and there.
So I want to acknowledge that our dear mutual friend, Ryan Baker, has been watching the Zoom call. Ryan is the host of CBS Morning Show from 5 to 7 in the morning, and he does a spectacular job. He also bleeds orange and blue and has coined the statement that Josh Whitman has quoted him on: bigger rings, bigger things, or it's bigger things, bigger rings. So we'll remember that as we go through the March Madness, that there are bigger things in store for the Illini than just a Big Ten championship.
No doubt. What's up, Bake? That's my big brother.
So there's another question from what were some of the things, here we go. Sorry about that. So I know I've got another chat question here. Here we go. What were some of the challenges that you had to overcome as you pursued your dream to be a professional basketball player? That from Ellie Lancey, excuse me.
So some of the challenges were, again, they were inner challenges. It was understanding what needed to be done, the discipline that it took in order to reach that level, the practices that had to be put in, the study sessions that had to be put in, the understanding of the game and of the individuals and what it took to be there, and then taking all of that and actually working on it. Um, the difficult part sometimes at that time when, you know, we had to figure out how to get to various places. So you take the buses, and thank God in Chicago at that time, if you were an athlete, the gangs didn't bother you. So you would be able to go various places to work on your game, to play basketball and to work out with different people. So I would say the inner things were probably the most challenging, and making sure you get up and you put in the work, and you do all the things that you need to do to get better. So that's where I guess the bigger, and listening and learning from those that know before you is huge. So listening to your coaches, taking the information that they give you, and being better at implementing those things.
This question from Jennifer Sosnow wants to know about the BDS vote at the U of I campus, and was it different when you were on campus in terms of U.S.-Israel relations and student relations with the state of Israel?
Wow. You know, I wish I had an answer for you on that, if it was different or not. When I was on campus, Jennifer, there were about maybe 2,000, or maybe, no, probably less than that, African-American students. I was not, to coin the phrase that they're using today, woke enough to to really pay attention to the other things that were going on around me. I do not remember there being very, if any, anti-Semitic issues that were going on. I don't remember there being anyone, you know, like BDS or things on campus at that time. I will have to say I was really focused on getting and doing what I needed to do. So I wish I could answer that one a little bit clearer for you, because I just don't remember a lot of that going on right now. And I guess that's a good thing, because maybe it wasn't happening the way it is at today's level.
So this question is from Roger Mudd. By the way, there was a famous newscaster in the 60s and 70s by the name of Roger Mudd. I'm wondering if this is your nom de guerre or if that's your real name. But he said, sorry if this was already covered, but Dion, did you convert to Judaism so we can claim you as one of our own?
Well, you can claim me as one of your own anyway. I've been practicing the religion for 20 plus years. But I'll say this. No, I did not go through the full conversion. And the reason I didn't, Rabbi Penny, who's still my confidant down in Florida, I would bother the heck out of him every year, every summer, when I would come home to do the conversion. And Rabbi Penny looked at me one day and told me, as he was hanging the mezuzot in my house, he was like, Dion, he was like, you don't need to do that. He was like, you're honestly more Jewish than the Jews that are in my congregation. Now, personally, I found that funny, and I took a deep appreciation in it, because I think he understood how serious I was about it, and how serious we were in my family about our practice.
So this question is from Jeff Eisman. He wants to know what we can do to help students combat anti-Israel sentiment on campus and anti-Semitism on campus.
What can we do? There has to be more discussions. I believe that there has to be more discussions. I believe there has to be more education. I don't think a lot of the kids that are anti-Israel really understand. I think young people today grasp onto issues that they think they know about and haven't really done a lot of their homework about it. And I'll give you an example of what happened with me once. When I was coaching at UIC, there was a group on campus and they were protesting Israel. And as I'm walking across the quad, a young lady wanted to hand me a flyer. And I asked her, we began a conversation when she wanted to hand this to me. And I asked her if she had ever been to Israel. And she told me no. So I asked her, I'm like, well, if you've never been to Israel, then how could you possibly be out here demonstrating against Israel? It doesn't sound right. So she got a little snarky and was like, well, have you been there? And I was like, Yes. I actually lived there for 5 years. You know, my wife is Israeli. I was like, so I've been there involved and I've seen what you're saying does not exist and that it's some type of, as you mentioned, apartheid country. I was like, I've been there. So unless you're there, then you can't actually run something down because you just don't know about it. And that's where the ignorance comes in, Scott, because I don't think here in this country, unfortunately, we do this far too often. We'll go and we'll believe what we see on Twitter, Facebook, and all these other things instead of doing our own homework, instead of going out and looking and exploring and appreciating our knowledge and what we gather. And that's where the biggest problem is. So to answer that question, what can we do? We need to have more forums like this. We need to have forums actually on campus. We need to have the tough conversations, because you don't get past it unless you have the tough conversation and try to get people to see through a different prism. And until we do that, then we're just going to continue to have the same problems, whether it's anti-Semitism or racism. We're going to continue to have the same things.
I don't know if you're aware, Dion, but the chancellor established an advisory council on anti-Semitism this week, and I think that's a step in the right direction for the university.
Agreed. I think it's something that's well deserved, and that doesn't surprise me. Chancellor Jones is a forward thinker. I believe in him and his direction, and that he understands this. I mean, there is some things that have to be done, and this is definitely a big step in that direction.
So you're aware I'm on the board of the Illinois Holocaust Museum, and we had our virtual dinner last week, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was the speaker, and someone asked him, well, what can we do to bridge the gap? And Kareem had a simple and eloquent answer. He said, make friends with someone who doesn't look like you. And I thought that was so brilliant and so simple. Yes. And I'd like to say that on a personal level, that Dion is my friend and brother. We work together in at-risk communities in Chicago. We try to foster better relations between those communities. And the final question I want to ask you, Dion, is what message would you impart on the Jewish and pro-Israel community that can help grow trust between people of different backgrounds?
That's a great question. I love that. And I love what Kareem Abdul-Jabbar said. When I've hosted a couple of diversity and inclusion meetings on campus at the University of Illinois. And I've had people ask me that question. His answer was the exact same question, was the exact same answer that I gave. But I prefaced it with a question and asked people, how many people do you know outside of your work circle, school circles, that don't look like you, that may not speak your language, or any of the above? That's what we do. And that's what you have to do. You have to develop relationships with people that are outside your comfort zone. And this is why I say you have the tough conversations. Most people are afraid to walk up to people that they don't know because they're afraid of rejection. It's their inner fears that stop them from branching out to others. It's not the other person, it's them, and it's within them. So until we can get over our inner fears and open up to people and be vulnerable with people, that's the way you solve these issues. You solve these issues through conversation. You solve these issues through getting to know someone that does not look like you, that doesn't have the same religion as you, that doesn't have the same background that you come from. People look at diversity as if it's a bad thing. Diversity is great. This is how you reach greatness. This is how you grow as a person. You can't do everything that you do in your individual life the exact same way every day. Because if not, then you stay the exact same person you are every day. When you as a person expand who you are by doing different things, you become a better person. When you learned how to walk, what was the next progression? You had to learn how to run. So you stepped outside of your comfort zone from crawling to walking, from walking to running. It's the exact same thing here. You go meet one person, then you go meet another one, you go meet their families, you go meet their families, and you'll see that we have so much more in common than we have in differences.
So I have one last thing to say to you, and I've had so much fun this past hour before we turn it over to Maya, and that is ILL.
INI, baby.
Maya, it's all yours.
Right. Trying to start my video, but it says the host has. Okay. Here we go. All right. Hi, everyone. I want to thank Scott and Dion for providing a glimpse into Dion's upbringing in Chicago's West Side, his esteemed basketball career, his relationship to Judaism, and for highlighting the relations and shared values between the American Jewish and Black communities. If you were inspired by Dion's story of getting involved in Israel, Jewish National Fund USA is building a campus in Beersheba for new conversations on unity, destiny, and leadership. We are looking for students to submit ideas for the Envision Tomorrow's Israel competition or to join focus groups for the campus. Check out zionistvillage.jnf.org. Again, if you're looking to travel to Israel, I encourage you to register for Alternative Break at jnf.org/break or apply to Caravan for Democracy at jnf.org/caravan. Thank you, Jewish National Fund USA and Hillel at the University of Illinois for making this Positively Israel program. Thank you to Illini Chabad, the Jewish Federation of Champaign-Urbana, and Sinai Temple of Urbana-Champaign for sponsoring. Thank you to all who have joined us tonight. To those who celebrate, I want to wish you a happy Passover. And for my current Illini Hillel family, students, don't forget to register for meals at Hillel. And good night to everyone.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.